Resident Evil 4 is getting a remake. Is it good, and why is it coming out in the first place? Let's find out. Resident Evil 4 was a landmark in the action horror genre. When I was first given the ability to know that I exist, some of my first memories were seeing my family members play the game on the family's PlayStation 2. And nothing scared me like Resident Evil did. Something about one man versus horrors that just keep walking at you no matter what happens, constantly stumbling towards you. The clunky controls to the modern day audience, with me eventually trying it on the PlayStation 4, 2 console generations apart, added onto that. And even though the graphics are very dated by now, I knew that this game was a masterclass in what it did. There are a few things that your character Leon S. Kennedy can do, which include shooting, walking, running, throwing grenades, and slashing his knife, as well as roundhouse kicking people. And the game constantly plays with you. Stuff like aiming for the head doesn't actually help out as much, because parasites come out of them that insta-kill you if you get grabbed. Usually, not only for crowd control but also conserving ammo, shooting enemies in the legs is probably the best thing you can do. This makes it so when they're on the ground you can go and knife the enemy. Popping their kneecaps off and prison shaking your enemies was a great way to award the player for paying attention and knowing their enemies. Plus, if they're starting out on the ground, you can be really silly and walk up and roundhouse kick them like that bit from Family Guy. The tone of the game was rich, horrifying, and thrilling, going through normal, real-life Spain, where you must deal with the Zaza-stricken natives while you try to find and rescue the president's daughter. The game also has great reactions towards the player, including the pathing and interactions with enemies and how they appear in the game, with the game itself keeping a close eye on the player's progress, fluctuating in difficulty depending on how much trouble the player is having, with the game having less ammo for people that have been killing everything, and the game having more ammo for people who have been struggling and health drops. The game came out in the prehistoric year of 2005 to universal praise, and being rated among the other critically acclaimed Resident Evil games like 2 and Village, with it being given a 90 out of 100 by most media outlets. Some of its characters became so ingrained into gaming culture that every once in a while someone will still ask you what you might be buying in a certain specific cadence and tone. It's been 18 years since the original game came out, and since then there's been a big drive for cinematic games like The Last of Us, and have changed the landscape of what a general audience want with most story-rich games, with many of them being a playable movie with awesome graphics to boot. Most people don't like characters that don't change with one-liners anymore. They like sad old men that are leading their child on an adventure to save the world or something more personal. Things like microtransactions have become much more present, and games come out with buggy, unfinished launches, with their content being added in updates and roadmaps instead of being one single game put together at the game's launch. To see if the game was going to have such systems or not, we would have to look at the other Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. The first Resident Evil also got a remake, but that was for the Xbox 360 generation of consoles, so it doesn't really count, being on a different game engine and such. Resident Evil 2 was a loyal interpretation that used modern technology to fully showcase the original ideas and tone of the game, with it not only changing the gameplay to a more modern approach with a third-person combat and control schemes, where originally it was just a fixed camera game. Everything from the original game is there, and remixed a little bit to make it more exciting, making it one of the best Resident Evil games to play. And there's like one DLC to the game where it adds a different pistol you can use. I don't know, I don't think it's that bad. Resident Evil as a game gutted the game, and suffers from cut corners. It was a side project besides the parts that have Nemesis in it, being the named key antagonistic force that walks with you all the way through the game. It kinda felt like they took all the good lessons they learned from Resident Evil 2's remake and forgot them, but them getting rid of an alternative campaign too. Working chronologically, Resident Evil 4 was the next to get the treatment. Capcom, the makers of the game, said that the game would be closer to the style of Resident Evil 2's remake, with the game being more accurate to the original game, keeping the story and order the same, but also remaking some of the segments to not only flow better, but to have a much more rich atmosphere and experience. A few days ago, Resident Evil 4's Chainsaw demo came out, covering the start of the game, up until the first battle concludes in the small village, right where the shotgun can be unlocked and you have to fight against insurmountable odds. So now that the demo's out, how is it? At the start of the demo, Leon talks about how horrible it was to live through the events of Resident Evil 2, while also being voluntold to be part of a government agency, when he's sent to save the president's daughter in the post-apocalyptic land of Spanish Europe, and he even gets a cool new fluffy jacket to boot. The first cabin you go into the game is different, with its dimensions and overall layout being new, with new dialogue and even a new cutscene and an event changing, including a small excursion into a basement, as well as multiple animals that have been gutted and sloppily butchered. I'm not going to show you that though, because, you know, this is a YouTube video and I don't want to get banned. The animals help show that the people are sloppy butchers and kind of blood hungry, leaving animals out while making stew that has cartoon stink lines coming out of it. Seriously, what is that even made of? Besides that, most things in the demos stay the same for the game, with changes to the in-between sections being revamped to be better connected to one another, with things like the gate to the first town square being a bit more spooky with heads lining on the top of it, with one falling down as you walk. The gameplay is still ever amazingly intense, with the chainsaw man, I mean the man with the chainsaw, having an awesomely weird and horrifying design, while still being a threat you have to actively run away from. The building blocks from the game that came out in 2005 are still there, and I reluctantly say that might be able to do it better than the original game. But who knows, since this is only the first 15 minutes of playtime. This still might turn out like a Resident Evil 3, because the start of Resident Evil 3's remake is very good, but it falls off. What do you guys think about Resident Evil 4 and its remake? I think the original was awesome, with the remake being one of my most anticipated games this year. Would you like me to cover more horror gaming content in the future? If so, make sure to leave a like and a comment down below. Maybe even subscribe if you got this far. Till next video, fellas!
Where's everyone going? Bingo?